It's a brand new week, viewers, and you're welcome to the Economy and Politics Show, where we discuss policy, investments, the economy as it affects the populace. It's September 14th, 2020, and today we'll be looking at the recent 15-point statement from the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, and one of it was around the seaports and terminals, driving efficiency there, reducing congestion, and also ensuring that even the eastern ports are effectively utilized to improve trade and industrialization in Nigeria. You agree with me that seaports and terminals play critical roles in driving industrialization, trade and investment across countries in the globe. A good example are climes like Dubai in United Arab Emirates, where the ports have been able to improve accessibility for investments. To have this conversation with me today, looking at the seaports and terminals driving efficiency in that space in Nigeria, is Mr. Soji Apampa, the CEO of Convention on Business Integrity, and they've been working round the clock to ensure that our seaports and terminals are effective, working with the Maritime Anti-Corruption Network to ensure that issues of corruption are addressed, but more further, working with other relevant agencies to improve the ease of doing business in that space. It's nice to have you on the show.
Thank you so much.
Yes. As earlier stated, the work between the CBI and the MACN in improving the ease of doing business at the Nigerian seaports and terminals are quite commendable. In the area of strengthening the standard operating procedures for all stakeholders in the ecosystem, it has been effective during and post-COVID-19 pandemic. I'd like you to give us so far your engagement with stakeholders. Even recently, you had a conversation even down to the chairman of the Presidential Task Force on Restoration of Order in the ports. The vice chairman, that's Mr. Kaide Opeifa, who was the former commissioner of transport in Lagos State. There was a communique around the issue of addressing corruption at the Nigerian ports. But how has the SOPs been pre, during, and as we begin to ease from the pandemic? There have been complaints, but from the feedback, has there been remarkable improvement?
Well, thank you very much. According to MACN data, in 2019, I think there were 266 incidents that were reported relating to Nigerian ports, complaints received regarding vessels calling at Nigerian ports. But so far this year, there have only been 91 cases reported, which is a sharp drop. Of these 91 cases, 71 cases were recorded in the first quarter, which is really, we can say, pre-COVID. During quarter two, up to June, there were 17 cases. And so far, after June, there have now been only 4 cases. So it's either COVID has had a very great impact, or the SOPs and compliance with it is improving, or both things are happening at the same time. So that's according to the data, there has been a sharp drop in incidents at the ports. So that's the much that we know at the moment, but the reasons are not too clear to us. But going by what we're finding, those who have reported directly through our help desk, we're finding that of like 13 reports we have received through our help desk, only 7 relate to incidents, and all incidents have been resolved immediately. There are no outstanding incidents of the ones that were reported through the Shippers Council and through the help desk at cbinigeria.com. All of those have been resolved. So there might be evidence that things are improving.
Yeah. Might be evidence that things are improving.
And even this year, the various teams from the globe, including the International Monetary Fund and other experts, raised the need for reducing the congestion in Apapa. And of course, recently now, the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, in its 15-page statement, took one of it for the ports. They harped on urgent solutions to address the congestion in Apapa ports. And I'm aware of the consultations you've made with the relevant Ministries Department and Agencies, from the Nigerian Shippers Council to NIMASA, the Nigerian Maritime and Safety Agency, and also the Nigerian Ports Authority. Even the last communique from the forum you had with the MACN, partnering with CBI, it was stated that there was need for coordination between all different agencies operating at the ports. And there was a lack of checks and balances on the part of port agencies. And the recommendation was the need to ensure that regulation is not revenue driven. This will ensure all agencies operate within the confines of their jurisdiction, with activities more coordinated, and necessary checks and balances for all port agencies are put in place. And of course, the SOPs have to be implemented. So there was a recent consultation you had with all the stakeholders. What was the outcome of that consultation? And I also know you're in talks also with the presidency, where the vice president also monitors this. Are we seeing that coordination to ensure that the issues that cause this congestion from the soft parts are addressed, even as we look at the infrastructure area?
Okay. Now, in terms of the remit for the Maritime Anti-Corruption Network, it's around the issues of corruption and trying to improve efficiency of the ports through better adherence to the standard operating procedures. But in pursuit of that, many stakeholders keep talking about the infrastructural challenges, which is what you referred to, which is why those who are responsible for infrastructure were also brought into the discussion. But from what we're seeing on the side of infrastructure, not enough has improved around that. We had a meeting at Shippers Council just last week, and I know it took 3 solid hours to go from Ikeja to Apapa for that meeting. Just to get from Ikeja, and the traffic did not begin until one got to around Ikwanri. To then just go to Apapa, it took 3 solid hours in the morning, and it was impossible to come that same day. We had to spend money by flying into Lagos the day before, staying in a hotel, just to be able to make it in time into Apapa for a 10 o'clock meeting. So the situation has not changed, actually. It has not improved, and there is grave cause for concern in that area.
Yeah. I mean, there's great
cause for concern, which your group in partnership with MSCN has raised over time. And we also know that there have been an effort by federal government to partner with private sector. Remember, also our experience, we held up in traffic time to cover the flag of the Dangote Flour Mills initiative to work on the WAF road side, and we had at a point to come down and take alternative means to make it up for the coverage. So it's a huge issue, and I believe that all stakeholders at the last webinar, even the Presidential Task Force, will work assiduously to really address the issue. And this leads on to something which, again, is laudable on your part.
Before you go on, they had talked about using barges to move containers to Ikorodu and other locations. Also, I'm aware that they are racing to try to complete the rail link. Once the rail link also starts working, there can be maybe greater evacuation of those containers and maybe reduce the number of trucks that are waiting. Maybe now they can fix the roads, because the roads are in a grave state of disrepair. Even the bridges, they look like a death trap at the moment.
Yes. And that brings us to something else which CBI MSCN have been doing, which is also commendable, because for a while, the Eastern Port Axis, which of course the NESG also raised concerns about, had not been effectively utilized. And part of the concerns in my interaction with some of the policymakers was the concerns of those who operate that route, saying issues of security not being guaranteed. And now
NESG, just like you and MSCN, have emphasized the need for reopening of the Eastern ports. We saw some activities recently, which is well noted from the federal government. And so your role has not been ignored in driving that. We also know that there was an engagement between CBI, MACN with the operators in the Eastern Port Axis. So in terms of the engagement with stakeholders, are we seeing that increased commitment from the key players, MDAs and the government, to improve the infrastructure there and security? And how are the SOPs, which we see working in Apapa, is it extending to the Eastern ports from what you've seen so far, from the feedback?
Okay. In relation to the SOPs, what we have found is there is better adherence in Apapa and Tinkan. The further away you move on land from Lagos, the less likely it is that the SOPs are followed. And then the further offshore you go from land offshore, the less likely again that the SOPs are followed. So it's even worse when you're going to Brass LNG and all of those places. It's a different story, especially Bonny, all the areas under Bonny, and many of them are floating production platforms far out at sea, where even the agencies forget that they have people there. There, it's a different law entirely. So we've been pushing and asking that we must have compliance officers in each of these agencies in order to be able to have reminders, timely reminders to rank and file about standard operating procedures, the need for compliance, and we're also asking for consequence management so that if people are flouting it, they know that there is a real repercussion for it. For instance, just yesterday, we got news of people boarding a vessel in Brass and demanding $3,000 from the shipmaster. But the shipmaster held his ground, refused to pay. Eventually, they got off. But they did not properly sign. They refused to properly sign the register. So you can't trace them. And now there's a fear that when that vessel comes again next time, they may cite them for an infraction that you did not properly register the people who came on board. You see how all of these things still happen. But in terms of infrastructure for Eastern ports, the big vessel that came in, 300 meters long and can take 10,000 plus containers, was a demonstration by the government that they are now able to bring large vessels into that area. But stakeholders were telling us, yes, security is an issue, but a bigger issue is the cost of shipping, they were saying. That if you try to move your goods to the Eastern ports at the moment, the cost of shipping will kill you. So you better just still send it to Lagos. And I think it is because of the security issues and the fact that not much cargo was going there. So they're in a bit of a catch-22 situation until there is a lot more incentive for vessels to go to the Eastern ports. So it is not really about infrastructure at this moment. It's more about security and the cost profiles that is keeping cargo from going to the Eastern ports, at least to One and Port Harcourt at the moment.
Yes, I mean, security
and the cost profiles. And like you said, incentives are very key at this point to improve that service. And while we speak about this, there are other projects ongoing on that axis. I mean, of course, we know the Ibom Deep Sea project is being proposed. Full business case has been done, and they're awaiting the approval from the federal government. And there are several other ports, like the Gelegele in Edo State. The Warri Port has always been there, Calabar Port. And the Cross River State government, even with Calabar Port, are also looking at the Bakassi Deep Sea Port. So several port projects, but like you've said, if the security and the costs of shipping are not addressed, it will definitely affect such projects, and it's very important that those issues are looked at. But what are your thoughts around these various projects coming up? Because Apapa congestion has been a huge issue. We have the Lekki Deep Sea Port, Ibom Deep Sea Port, and several other projects on board in the South-South region.
Yeah. I think really the reason for these projects are that the ports that we have at the moment are not deep enough. So one could be tempted to say, why don't you focus on the few that we have? But if the dredging was not done at One, if you would not have had that size of vessel, and it's the largest ever. But the fact that it could go to One also probably suggests that it may not be able to come to Lagos. So you need those deep sea ports. Now, the question is, how many of them do you need? And how many of them can you maintain? And will they be maintained by the government, or will they be maintained by the private sector? Because if they have to be maintained by the private sector, that gives a bit more hope, because the private sector is going to be in it for profit. They're going to have to make sure that they have maximum uptime and that these things are running. But yes, the cost of the services, you may then debate down the line. So I think we need to look at how many of them are we doing with public funds, and how many are we encouraging investors to do a proper feasibility to see whether it makes sense financially to actually run such projects, and on that basis, giving them a license to operate on a long lease on which they can operate such ports. So I think there is room for us to consider very carefully how many we need, but we do need deep sea ports.
Yeah, and so far with
what you reported in terms of the SOPs operation from the MACN, what's the feedback in terms of assessing Nigerian seaports and terminals? Are the international players beginning to see that, yes, things have improved, and yet they are guaranteed that there are people on ground that are always addressing issues or infractions or concerns?
Okay, what people are beginning to understand is that integrity can coexist with corruption, and it's a matter of choice. That now in Nigeria, there is a choice. You can choose to follow a path that will take you through integrity and keep you from corrupt behavior, or you can go on with business as usual. So it's not as though corruption has disappeared at the ports, but alternatives have arisen. And those alternatives are now being tested, and they're found to be working. So many more people now have a choice. Now, what we have to do is improve awareness about the SOPs, about the grievance reporting mechanism, and what you need to do in order to avoid corruption. But corruption hasn't disappeared. So you can have the incidents, or you can have them resolved as quickly as possible without you having to make illicit payments. That is what we have achieved.
And in terms of capacity building for compliance officers
across all the agencies, are there efforts in that regard? Definitely MSC and CBI will want to work to help build that capacity, because it's very important at this time. Particularly, I believe that during the COVID, when operations, of course, would be more effective through digital operations, that would have been very key.
Yes, a lot was done digitally during the COVID era. And we want to encourage the government to continue with it and not revert to the old systems, because even the freight forwarders are saying on their part, things ran very smoothly during the COVID era. But just to say that we do have a project now to train some 300 officers across all the locations on compliance management. So we are looking to engage further with the government, and this part of the project is being funded by the Siemens Integrity Initiative. So there is a big opportunity to collaborate on the area of deepening these integrity alternatives that are now emerging. So at least in this fourth quarter of 2020, we plan to have identified and started engagement around those kind of capacity building.
That's very commendable, because
with that level of capacity building of 300 people, it will go a long way to equip them, and they can even be spread across the country, various regions of the ports, to assist in compliance management. One other area of concern always in the country has been the cooperation amongst MDAs. So based on the fact that you would always give a very clear objective view, are you seeing that cooperation? Stakeholders were talking about it over the time, that there's need for cooperation. Everyone needs to sing from the same hymn book, whether it's the Shippers Council, NIMASA, NPA, and other key stakeholders.
Yeah, I know that there are overlaps in mandates, and in some areas there is no clarity. For instance, customs feels that all of these ports are customs ports, and therefore it is customs that should be leading everything that is happening there. Not even NPA, not even Shippers Council, not anybody else. So you can have those kinds of debates. Also, with Shippers Council as the economic regulator, they will expect to lead in their role. You have NPA as the technical operator and the landlord of all of the ports. So yes, you can see that there is the possibility, but at the end of the day, there is a lot of cooperation, though. There's more cooperation than there is disunity amongst these agencies. And on the project with MACN, for instance, all of them have representatives in the steering committee, and they tend to work together harmoniously. So I would like to say that, this could be improved, and we need some clarity from the government. And we have asked His Excellency, the Vice President, to help make a pronouncement. And we've written also to the President, asking for him to make a pronouncement on this for a lead agency, so that we can stop all of this stepping on each other's toes. But operationally, they do try to work as closely together as possible.
So when you say pronouncement on a lead agency,
what areas do you want that lead agency to take charge of?
Let's talk about enforcement of the SOPs. Okay. Who enforces the SOPs right now? Nobody. Nobody. So who ensures consequence management? Nobody, really. So this was part of why His Excellency, then the Vice President, then mentioned to ICPC that they should look into this matter. And ICPC has been working very closely with the Shippers Council in order to make sure that if ICPC catches people who are flouting, especially in a criminal way, for example, by demanding bribes and illicit payments from cargo owners or shippers, that then ICPC, who is already duly empowered, can then play that role and deal with that issue. But in how many places can you split yourself as ICPC? With all of the ports and terminals that we have, which is what brought the idea that actually each agency must have their own compliance officers that can strengthen their ability from within. Then coordination by ICPC, Shippers Council, and whoever else. Even if Custom wants to do that or MPA, it doesn't really matter. Coordination then becomes much simpler because you do have the people who are already ensuring that these things happen.
And Mr. Apampa, I know you also have a lot of
international exposure too. Based on your interaction with Mr. Vivek Menon and others in the MSCN, are there examples of countries, even in Africa, that have been able to achieve this synergy amongst MDAs and lead agency on enforcement of SOPs that we can learn from? Because we hear a lot that people prefer to go to other ports than even the Apapa one, and now we need to make it more viable, all the seaports and terminals in the country.
Of a truth, people prefer the processes in Togo. They think that they can predict how much it will cost them upfront and how long it will take to clear their cargoes, which is what everybody's looking for. Predictability in terms of cost and time. They can get that also from Ghana. They can get that also from Benin Republic. But you can't get that in any ports in Nigeria. So that is a challenge. However, having said that, the whole process of management of grievances through this integrity path that I mentioned, Nigeria is on the leading edge. Ukraine is now looking at Nigeria's example. Argentina is looking at it. India is looking. Egypt is also looking at what Nigeria is doing. So we are now encouraging the Shippers Council to host a meeting of Shippers Councils from around West Africa and across Africa, so that their methodology can be spread across West Africa and other countries. So we have uniform ways of operating and ensuring there is integrity, because the same people who ship to Nigeria are giving us the feedback that when there are grievances, for example, in Ivory Coast or in Algeria, they do not have the same kind of integrity system through which they can escalate the issues. So they're asking whether we can also spread the project to those locations. But that is a thing that can work at the governmental level, maybe through the Shippers Council. So we're ready to work with the Shippers Council, and we have broached this already with the Executive Secretary, who has looked at it very favorably.
I think that's a very good one for
this collaboration between CBI and MACN, because the goal is beginning to get bigger. I mean, when Ukraine, India, and Egypt are looking at us for grievance mechanism, how we manage it, and of course, SOPs, definitely we are making some impact in some levels, and definitely we should get to that point of predictability and resolution, which is very key too. But if you were in the room now, I know you've talked about pronouncement from the president and the vice president, the lead agency, to drive enforcement of SOPs in the seaport and terminals. What other issues would you raise, like 2-3, with the president, the vice president, and even the Minister of Transportation, Right Honorable Rotimi Amechi, and his Minister of State, Senator Gbemisola Saraki? What would be those 2-3 issues you would like them to address to?
Number one is to strengthen the SOPs. Not everything is covered by SOPs. There are some areas that are still discretionary. And yes, this has been a fantastic start, but the appetite should grow a bit bigger to include a lot of the oil and gas issues as well in there, because not much of those, and the technical things that they do, like midstream shipments, moving from one vessel to the other, and so on. There are all sorts of rules around that. When they have to rush in spare parts by air, even getting those things cleared, there are no real SOPs around it, and it leaves a lacuna, because the agencies know that every day that a rig is shut down can cost $1 million. So do you want to part with $3,000, $10,000, $50,000 so you can save $1 million? Those kind of propositions are still being put to some aspects of industry, which could be changed. And then secondly, is to strengthen these consequence management. But I would say that the government has done a step further, because now the Federal Executive Council has approved ICPCs and National Orientation Agencies, ethics and integrity national policy. So I'm sure that in a matter of months, something will be rolled out by those agencies, which also includes consequence management right across the system, and not just in the ports alone, which is a huge thing that is not happening.
Very credible steps
that needs to be taken to improve the situation in our seaports and terminals. Just to really stretch the issues that have been discussed, there's been significant reduction in the grievance cases so far from the SOPs implemented from the work between the Convention on Business Integrity and the Maritime Anti-Corruption Network, MACN, from last year 266 went down to 91 and 4. And of course, between the SOPs and the COVID, we may not really know, but at least there have been some improvements. And then for the eastern ports, there's need for the cost of shipping and security to be addressed. Those are key issues that will increase activities and reduce the congestion level, even as infrastructure is something that we expect to be ramped up, particularly federal government partnering with the private sector. Also from CBI and MACN collaboration, we're happy to hear that you're planning to train 300 officers in the across the MDAs responsible for the seaport and terminals on compliance management. And there's also need for more cooperation amongst the MDAs. Also, the need for the president and vice president to make that clear pronouncement of the lead agency that will drive enforcement of the SOPs in the seaport and terminals. And for me, most importantly and most exciting, the fact that countries like Ukraine, Egypt, and India are looking at Nigeria's processes, SOPs, and grievance management as templates they can use also to improve their operations. And of course, the need to strengthen the SOPs, particularly in the oil and gas sector, which is critical, and also consequence management, which has to be strengthened by the coordination of the Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences Commission. It has been really wonderful having this conversation with you, Mr. Soji Apampa. Indeed, there's a lot of hope that with more of collaboration and more of understanding and more of policy regulation, looking at all the issues effectively, we can make our seaports and terminals very competitive and more accessible and to go in West Africa and across Africa. And it's very important as we gear up for the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement full implementation from next year. Hope to have more of this conversation with you. Mr. Soji Apampa, CEO of the Convention on Business Integrity, who had this conversation around improving efficiency at our seaports and terminals. Thank you once again, and wishing you all the best as you continue to drive advocacy at those very key areas.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Have a nice day.
Thank you. Yeah. And that'll be all for this edition of the Economy and Politics Show. Continue to join us from 9 a.m. to the week as we discuss issues around the economy, policy, investment as it affects Nigerians. By 10 a.m., we'll have the market review where we discuss developments, and today, Monday, on the equities markets. Join our website, www.prochange.com, to watch our videos with our news reports and analysis. Till we come your way again, thank you for watching. Have a nice day and stay safe.